I sat quietly on my leather sofa, sipping my tea, listening to my son Mark scream through the phone. His voice was a raw, panicked shriek, filled with a kind of disbelief only the truly entitled can muster. "What do you mean the account is empty, Mum? What did you do? Where is my money?" His wife, Jessica, was wailing in the background, a high-pitched sound of pure greed turning to ash in her mouth. I took another slow, deliberate sip, letting the warmth of the ceramic mug seep into my hands. I pictured them at the bank, their perfect, curated smiles melting into masks of horror as the teller gave them the news. They had walked in expecting to transfer my entire life savings, $500,000, into Jessica's personal account. They were walking out with nothing but the echo of their own arrogance. He called it his money, but he had no idea that the $500,000 he had just tried to wire to his wife's account was never meant for him. For 30 years, I had allowed them to believe a lie. I had let them see me as a resource, a utility, an endless well of support they could draw from whenever they pleased. Mark was my golden child, the son who could do no wrong, and his wife was the queen he had chosen. They believed I existed solely to fund their perfect life, to sacrifice my own comfort and future for their immediate gratification. They saw my calloused hands and my frugal habits not as signs of my love and sacrifice, but as proof of my simplicity, my foolishness. They thought I was a simple old woman who didn't understand the complexities of modern finance or the subtle cruelties of her own family. They were wrong. You might be wondering why a mother would do this to her own son. To understand that, you have to understand the lifetime of choices that led us to this single, irreversible moment. You have to go back to the beginning, to a house where there were 2 children, but only one was ever truly seen. My husband Robert passed away when the children were young, and I think I tried to overcompensate for his absence. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep our small house and make sure my children never felt the sting of poverty. But in my exhaustion, I clung to the roles Robert had assigned them. Mark, his son, was his legacy. He was the one who would carry the family name forward, the one who needed a strong start, as Robert always said. My daughter, Clara, was quiet and self-sufficient. I told myself she didn't need as much. It was a convenient lie that made my life easier. The inequity was woven into the fabric of our daily lives. When Mark needed money for a school trip, I'd pull a double shift at the diner without a second thought. When Clara's shoes wore out, I'd patch them with duct tape and tell her to make them last until Christmas. Mark got a brand new sedan for his 16th birthday. Clara got a bus pass and a lecture on responsibility. I paid for every cent of Mark's 4-year university degree, covering his tuition, his rent, and his spending money. Clara worked her way through community college, applying for every scholarship she could find, and never once asked me for a dollar. I see now that I wasn't just neglecting her, I was actively punishing her for her competence. Her independence meant I could pour all my limited resources, my money, my time, my affection, into her brother. Mark's smallest successes were met with lavish praise and celebratory dinners. Clara's significant achievements, like getting a full scholarship for her master's degree, were met with a distracted, "That's nice, dear." I was so focused on propping up my son that I never stopped to see the incredible woman my daughter was becoming on her own. This was the broken foundation upon which our family was built. It was a system I created, a machine of my own design, and for years, it ran exactly as I intended, until the day Mark came to me, with Jessica by his side, and asked for the one thing I had left. They arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember the sun was streaming through my window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and the faint shabbiness of my furniture. Jessica glided in first, smelling of a perfume so expensive it seemed to suck all the humble, familiar scents out of my small living room. She wore a cream-coloured pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Mark followed, carrying a leather briefcase, looking every bit the successful businessman he pretended to be. He'd never held a job for more than a year, always moving on to the next big thing, which was usually funded by a loan from me that was never repaid. They didn't waste time with small talk. Jessica cooed about how cozy my little house was, her eyes scanning my worn-out armchair with a flicker of pity. Mark opened his briefcase on my coffee table, revealing not papers but a glossy, professionally printed brochure for a real estate development. "Mum, we have the opportunity of a lifetime," he began, his voice smooth and rehearsed. He spoke of pre-construction prices, guaranteed rental yields, and exponential growth. It was a vocabulary designed to sound impressive and confusing, and he delivered it with the unearned confidence of a man who has never had to face a single real-world consequence. Jessica placed her perfectly manicured hand on my arm. Her touch was cold. "What Mark is saying, Mum, is that this is for us, for the family. We want to secure your future." They painted a beautiful picture of my golden years, a life where I wouldn't have to worry about bills anymore. They talked about buying me a small modern condo near them so I could see my future grandchildren. They promised me trips I'd never taken, comforts I'd never allowed myself. It was a beautiful, seductive lie. They were selling me a dream, and the price was my entire life's work, the $500,000 I had painstakingly saved over 40 years of back-breaking labor. A small, rational part of my brain screamed in protest, but it was drowned out by a lifetime of conditioning. Saying yes to Mark was a reflex. It was the path of least resistance. So, I looked at my golden child and his polished wife, and I nodded. "Okay," I said, "I'll do it." The next week was a blur of activity. Mark needed statements from accounts I had held for decades, old certificates of deposit, and signatures on transfer forms. He and Jessica called me every single day, their voices dripping with a false, sugary concern I hadn't heard in years. "Are you eating properly, Mom?" Jessica would ask. "Don't tire yourself out with all this paperwork," Mark would add. They were treating me like a fragile piece of glass, terrified I might break, or worse, change my mind, before the transaction was complete. I was gathering the final document, an original account agreement from the bank, when Mark called in a panic. He said the lawyers needed it immediately to lock in the price. He asked if I could drop it off at their house. I arrived at their pristine suburban home an hour later. I walked up the stone pathway, the paperwork clutched in my hand like a ticket to their future. I was about to ring the bell when I heard their voices spilling out from the open kitchen window. They were laughing. It was not a pleasant sound. "I still can't believe she fell for it," Jessica said, her voice sharp with glee. "Securing your future, honestly, Mark, you're a genius." "She's always been easy," Mark replied, and his casual cruelty struck me like a physical blow. "She would have handed it over if I'd told her I was investing in magic beans. The old fool is so desperate for my attention." I stood frozen on their perfectly manicured lawn, my feet rooted to the spot. "And the best part," Jessica continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "is that 2-month trip to Europe we booked. First class all the way. We'll be sipping champagne in Paris while her money is being transferred. By the time we get back and buy the house, she'll be ready for sunny meadows." Mark snorted. "God, that place is a dump." Jessica's voice was cold as ice. "She won't care. She's lived like a pauper her whole life. It's what she's used to." I didn't make a sound. I backed away from the window, step by silent step, until I was back in my car. The love I held for my son, a vast and unconditional thing that had defined my entire life, simply ceased to exist. It wasn't a slow fading, it was a sudden, violent extinguishment, leaving behind a cold, dark vacuum. By the time I put the key in my own front door, the weak, doting mother they knew was gone for good. In her place stood a woman they had created, a woman who now had a singular purpose. My first instinct was to call Mark and scream, to unleash a torrent of rage and pain. But the woman I was now was colder, more methodical. An emotional outburst was what they would expect from the foolish old woman they thought I was. It would give them a chance to lie, to manipulate, to turn the tables on me. I would not give them that satisfaction. Instead, I sat down at my kitchen table, the undelivered paperwork beside me, and made a call I hadn't made in months. My fingers trembled as I dialed Clara's number. The shame was a physical weight in my chest. I hadn't even called to wish her a happy birthday a few weeks ago. She answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. "Mom?" There was a long silence where I tried to find the right words, but there were none. So I simply told the truth. "Clara, I'm in trouble. I've been a fool and I need your help." I laid it all bare. The lifetime of favouring Mark, the plan to give him my life savings, the cruel words I had overheard through the window. I confessed my own weakness, my willful blindness, my complicity in the dynamic that had hurt her for so long. I expected her to be angry, to finally unload years of justified resentment. Instead, after I finished, she was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. "Okay, Mom, where are the bank statements? Read me the name of the financial institution and the account numbers." I was taken aback by her practicality. It turned out that the daughter I had dismissed as needing nothing had quietly built a successful career for herself as a financial planner. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. I gave her the information. "I haven't signed the final transfer authorization yet," I whispered. "Good," she said, a sharp edge to her voice. Do not answer the phone if he calls. First thing tomorrow morning, you and I are going to the bank. He's not getting a cent of that money." For the first time, I felt a flicker of something other than rage or despair. It was hope. I had spent a lifetime propping up the wrong child. Now, the one I had neglected was the only one who could save me. Clara arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. She wasn't the timid girl I remembered, but a woman of quiet authority. She carried a leather-bound folder and wore a simple, professional navy dress. There was no pity in her eyes, only a focused determination that I found immensely comforting. At the bank, she didn't lead me to the long teller line. Instead, she walked us straight to the polished wooden door of the branch manager, Mr. Harrison, with whom she had already scheduled an appointment. In his quiet, wood-panelled office, I finally felt like I could breathe. Clara took the lead. She laid out the situation for Mr. Harrison with the dispassionate precision of a surgeon, framing it as a necessary step to protect my assets from potential exploitation. She didn't need to mention Sunny Meadows or the trip to Paris. The facts were enough. I watched, completely mesmerized, as my daughter, the one I had deemed less capable, spoke a language of finance I barely understood. She talked of irrevocable trusts, fiduciary duties, and multi-signature withdrawal protocols. She wasn't just asking to stop a transaction, she was building a fortress. Following Clara's calm instructions, Mr. Harrison got to work. We closed my old savings account, the one Mark had the number for, the one he thought of as his personal piggy bank. The entire sum of $500,000 was then transferred into a newly created high-security trust. Clara was named the trustee. My signature was required for any activity, but so was hers. Mark's name was not only absent, but it was now flagged in the bank's system in a note detailing the situation. He was locked out completely and permanently. My hand was steady as I signed the final document. Each loop of my signature felt like a word in a declaration of independence I had waited a lifetime to write. We walked out of the bank into the bright sunshine, leaving my old life locked away in a vault. The money was safe, the trap was set. All we had to do now was wait for the rats to come for the cheese. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in their escalating panic. My phone, which had been silent for months before their opportunity, now buzzed incessantly. At first, the messages were sweet. "Hey, Mom, just checking in." Then they grew impatient. "Mum, the developers are calling. We need to wire the funds today. Please call me back." By Thursday evening, Mark's messages were clipped and angry. This is not a game, Mum. Pick up the phone. I'm starting to think you're doing this on purpose. Jessica left a final, tearful voicemail, her voice trembling with manufactured concern. Helen, we're just so worried about you. We're going to the bank tomorrow to sort this out for you. It was exactly what Clara had predicted. On Friday morning, Clara and I sat at my kitchen table sipping tea. We didn't speak much. There was nothing left to say. We were simply waiting. At exactly 10:35 a.m., my phone rang. The screen displayed Mark's name. I looked at Clara, took a deep breath and answered, putting it on speaker. The sound that erupted from the phone was not a human voice. It was the raw, animal shriek of a spoiled child who has just had his favourite toy snatched away. "What did you do?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "I'm here at the bank. They're saying the account doesn't exist, that the balance is zero. Where is it? Where is my money?" I let his rage wash over me. It felt distant, like a storm happening in another country. "My money?" I asked, my voice as calm and placid as a still lake. "Mark, why would you think you have money in my bank account? The $500,000, he shrieked. Our investment, our future." Suddenly, the phone was snatched away, and Jessica's voice, shrill and venomous, pierced the air. "You ungrateful old hag, after we planned everything, we were going to take care of you, give you a beautiful life." "You mean in Sunny Meadows?" I asked quietly. The line went dead silent. "Or did you mean after your 2-month first-class trip to Europe?" I heard a sharp gasp. They knew in that instant that the game was over. They had been exposed completely. "This conversation," I said into the silence, "is over." I pressed the end call button. The silence that filled my kitchen was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. We both knew they would be here any minute. It took them less than 15 minutes. A high-end sedan screeched to a halt at my curb, and they practically fell out of the car. They didn't knock. They hammered on my front door with their fists, the frantic thudding echoing through my small house. Clara put a steadying hand on my shoulder. I nodded, walked to the door, and opened it. I did not step back to let them in. I stood firm in the doorway, a human barrier they had never encountered before. They looked wild. Mark's face was blotchy and red, his expensive shirt rumpled. Jessica's eyes were puffy from crying, her makeup streaked. "Where is it?" Mark bellowed. Trying to push past me, I didn't move. "What have you done with my money?" "There seems to be a misunderstanding," I said, my voice even. "You don't have any money." "The inheritance from Dad, that's my money. You can't just steal my inheritance," he roared, his voice cracking with desperation. That was it, the line I knew he would say, the ultimate expression of his lifelong entitlement. I allowed a small, cold smile to touch my lips. "Your inheritance? Mark, you spent your inheritance years ago." I let the words sink in. He stared at me, confused. "Your father and I set up 2 funds when you were children, one for each of you. Yours was spent on your private university tuition, on the BMW you crashed when you were 20, on the seed money for the 3 separate businesses you drove into the ground, on the down payment for the very house you live in now. Your fund ran out a long time ago. You've been living on borrowed time and my goodwill ever since." His face went from red to a pale, sickly white. He looked utterly lost. "The $500,000, I continued, my voice clear and steady as a bell. "The money in that account was never yours to touch. Your father and I designated that for Clara. It was her inheritance. I was merely safeguarding it. And this morning, I finally delivered it to its rightful owner." I gestured behind me to Clara, who met his gaze without flinching. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a hollow, gaping emptiness. Jessica just stared, her mouth hanging open, the calculations in her greedy mind finally short-circuiting. There was nothing left to say. I looked at the man who was once my son. "Now get off my property," I said softly, and I closed the door. After I closed the door, a profound silence settled over the house. Clara and I stood there for a moment, not speaking. Then, for the first time, I truly looked at my daughter and saw the incredible woman she had become in spite of me. "Clara," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I am so sorry for everything." She didn't offer empty platitudes. She simply took my hand and squeezed it. It was enough. We never heard from Mark or Jessica directly again. Their downfall was a quiet, pathetic affair. We learned through town gossip that they had been living on credit cards and personal loans, anticipating their $500,000 payday. Without it, their world imploded. They had to sell their house at a loss to cover a fraction of their debts. The non-refundable tickets for their European fantasy expired, unused. Jessica, who had built her identity on being the wife of a man with prospects, left Mark within 3 months, blaming him for failing to secure their money. The last I heard, Mark was living in a dingy one-bedroom apartment across town, working a low-level sales job, a ghost of the golden child he once was. As for me, my life began. I sold that small house, which had always felt more like a cage of sacrifice than a home. With Clara's expert guidance, I bought a small, beautiful condo with a balcony that overlooked a garden. The money, Clara's money, was placed in a secure investment fund, generating a modest income that allowed me to live comfortably and without fear. My life wasn't filled with luxury. It was filled with something far more valuable: peace. I learned to paint. I joined a book club. I spent afternoons with Clara, not as a doting mother and a distant daughter, but as friends. We built a new relationship from the ground up, one based on honesty and mutual respect. The greatest revenge, I discovered, wasn't watching my son's life crumble. It was the quiet, joyful act of building my own.